I sat down with the wrong man on a blind date, then my real date arrived. The first thing the man across from me said was, "You're not Michael." I had been sitting at his table for almost 9 minutes. Long enough to learn that he hated olives, worked with his hands, and had once spent 3 months sleeping on a friend's sofa because he refused to renew a lease he already knew he wanted to leave. Long enough to think, unexpectedly, that my sister might have been right to make me come. Then he glanced toward the restaurant entrance, where another man in a dark coat had just stopped beside the host's stand and looked back at me. "You're Daniel, right?" he asked. "Yes." His expression changed. "Oh." I felt the evening tilt. "You're not Evans." "No." "Then who are you?" "Owen." We stared at each other. Behind him, the man by the host's stand lifted a hand. "Owen." The man across from me closed his eyes. I looked toward the entrance just as my phone buzzed. "Maya, Evan is running 10 minutes late. Green sweater, table by the window, be nice." I looked at Owen. Dark green sweater, table by the window. He looked at my phone, then down at his own. "I think," he said, "you sat down with the wrong man." I should have been embarrassed. Instead, my first thought was that 9 minutes had gone by too quickly. And by the end of that night, the fact that we had met by mistake was going to be the least confusing part. My sister Maya had been trying to get me to go on a date for 6 months. Not constantly. That would have been easier to ignore. She mentioned it the way people mention a smoke detector battery that has started chirping. Occasionally. Calmly. With the confidence that eventually you will do something, because living with the sound is worse. I was 31, single for a year and a half, and perfectly capable of arranging my own dates. That was the argument I used. Maya's answer was always the same. "Then arrange one." I never did. I worked as an editor for a small non-fiction publisher in Brooklyn, which meant I spent most days improving other people's sentences, and most evenings losing the ability to form my own. I liked my apartment. I liked cooking. I had friends I saw often enough that nobody had organized an intervention. I ran 3 mornings a week, called our mother on Sundays, and owned houseplants that were alive without being anyone's emergency. There was nothing visibly wrong with my life. That was what made it easy to leave alone. My last relationship had lasted 4 years. His name was Peter. There had been no betrayal and no single argument big enough to explain the end. We had simply become excellent at maintaining a relationship neither of us was fully inhabiting. We remembered groceries. We divided holidays. We knew each other's passwords. We had stopped asking difficult questions because the comfortable answers were already built into the furniture. When Peter finally said, "I think we're better at having a life than wanting this life," I was angry because the sentence was accurate. He moved out 6 weeks later. I replaced the kitchen table. That had been my dramatic recovery. 18 months later, Maya sent me a photograph of a man named Evan. "Of a friend," she said over the phone, 32, civil engineer, likes old movies, has a normal amount of hair. What does that mean? It means I know what you ask first. I have never asked that first. You think it loudly. I looked at the photograph. Evan seemed pleasant. That was not an insult. He had kind eyes, a crooked smile, and a blue jacket. Under different circumstances, I might have said yes without thinking. So I tried that. "Fine." There was silence on the phone. "Fine what?" "I'll go." "Are you sick?" "Maya, I need to document this. Do not make me regret it." She arranged the date for Thursday at 7:30 at a wine bar called Marlowe's, 3 subway stops from my apartment. At 7:24, she texted me. "He's wearing a green sweater, table by the window. Please do not interview him like an author whose footnotes are wrong." At 7:28, I walked into Marlowe's and saw a man in a dark green sweater sitting alone at the only table beside the front window. He looked up. I said, "Evan." The restaurant was loud enough that I did not hear whatever he said in response. But he stood. He smiled. And he gestured toward the chair across from him. That seemed definitive. I sat. The first thing I noticed about him was that the photograph Maya had sent me must have been old. The man in front of me had darker hair, more beard, broader shoulders. Then I remembered that photographs were unreliable and decided that questioning my date's face in the first 30 seconds was not an excellent beginning. "You made it," he said. "Apparently." He smiled. "You weren't sure." I considered turning around twice. "That's reassuring." Once was because I forgot whether I locked my door. And the second, blind date. He laughed. That was the first thing that made me relax. Not because the joke was good, because he did not perform the laugh. It arrived quickly and disappeared naturally, like he had forgotten he was supposed to be evaluating me. "I almost canceled," he said. "Why didn't you?" "My friend threatened to come to my apartment and dress me himself." "That seems invasive." "He owns a key." "More invasive." "He waters my plants." "Then he has leverage." A server appeared. The man across from me ordered sparkling water. I did the same. "We're exciting," he said. "I'm building toward wine." "Pacing." "Exactly." He held out his hand across the table. "Owen." I heard Evans. I am still willing to blame the room. "Daniel." His hand was warm. He had a small pale scar across one knuckle. I noticed that too. We talked. Not important things. That was why it worked. He told me he restored old furniture for a living, mostly chairs, tables, cabinets, and the occasional object somebody's grandmother had described as priceless even when it was not. "I like things people have already lived with," he said. "That sounds philosophical for a chair repairman. Furniture conservator." "Sorry. You should be." "What's the difference?" "I charge more." I laughed. He asked what I edited. History, architecture, biography, serious books purchased by people who underline things. "You don't like novels." "I like novels, they just don't pay me." That's a familiar business model. He told me his workshop was in Red Hook and that he lived 10 minutes away in a small apartment above a bakery. "Does it smell good?" "At 6 in the morning." "And after?" "By noon you stop noticing, which feels ungrateful." I told him about the bakery under my first apartment, where the exhaust fan had pointed directly at my bedroom window and made everything I owned smell faintly like sugar. He said that sounded ideal. I said he had never tried sleeping in a pastry. At some point, I stopped thinking about the fact that it was a blind date. Then the man by the host stand said, "Owen." And the room rearranged itself. The actual Owen date was named Michael. He was 34, worked in healthcare administration, and looked as confused as the three of us deserved. A moment later, my phone buzzed with Maya's message about Evan being late. Owen looked at my screen. Then at me. Then at the green sweater he was wearing. "This is unfortunate." "I disagree." "You sat with the wrong person." "That part is unfortunate." Michael reached the table. Owen stood immediately. "Michael, I'm sorry. I think we accidentally started each other's dates." Michael looked at me. I raised a hand. "Daniel, wrong table." To his credit, he laughed. I was wondering why the host said you'd been seated for 10 minutes. Owen pulled out the empty chair beside him. Then stopped. There were only 3 chairs. This somehow made the situation worse. "I can move," I said. "No, I can't," Owen said. "You have the window." "I don't care about the window. I was here incorrectly first." "That is not a rule." The host, who had clearly been watching our situation develop with professional fascination, rescued us. My actual date, Evan, arrived 4 minutes later. He was wearing a green sweater too. Of course he was. Marlowe's placed us at the table, immediately behind Owen and Michael. I wanted to object on architectural grounds. I did not. Evan apologized for being late. I told him not to. He was exactly the man from the photograph. Pleasant. Kind eyes. Crooked smile. Normal amount of hair. For 40 minutes we had a perfectly good date. That was the problem. Nothing was wrong. He asked good questions. He had just returned from visiting his sister in Vermont. He knew a surprising amount about silent films. We both disliked brunch lines. When he laughed, I laughed too. And yet every few minutes, without deciding to, I noticed the voice at the table behind me. Owen. Once when I reached for my glass, I caught his reflection in the window. He was looking at me. He immediately returned his attention to Michael. I did the same. At 8:45, Evan excused himself to use the restroom. My phone was on the table. A message arrived from Maya. Maya Wells. I typed. He seems nice. Before I could send it, another message appeared. Maya, nice is what you say about throw pillows. I put my phone face down. Behind me, Owen laughed. I did not know it what. I smiled anyway. Evan returned. We finished the evening with coffee. When the check came, he said, I had a good time. I did too. It was true. He looked relieved. Can I text you? There was the question. One I should have been able to answer without thinking about the man at the other table. I did not want to use Owen as an excuse not to choose something. That was exactly the kind of thing I had promised myself I would stop doing. I'd rather be honest, I said. I liked meeting you. I'm just not sure I felt the thing I'd want you to think I felt if I said yes. Evan studied me for a second. Then nodded. That's fair. I'm sorry. Don't be. I was trying to figure out how to say basically the same thing. I laughed. Good. Also, he added, you spent half the night pretending you weren't listening to the table behind you. Heat rose into my face. I did not. You're an editor, you know weak arguments when you hear them. I stared at him. He smiled. Go. Go where? Wherever he is. I am not chasing someone through a restaurant. You could at least turn around. I did. Owen's table was empty. For a second I felt ridiculous. Then Evan said, well, that's dramatic. I laughed. We said goodbye outside. No resentment. No false promise to remain friends. Just a decent evening with a decent person who had also understood it was not going anywhere. I should have gone home. Instead, I walked half a block toward the subway and saw Owen standing under the awning of a closed flower shop. Alone. He had his hands in the pockets of his coat. When he saw me, the same quick smile from the beginning returned. Wrong date, he said. Apparently. Yours leave. We both agreed not to inflict a second dinner on each other. That sounds healthy. Michael. Same. I stopped beside him. For a moment, we simply stood there while traffic moved through the wet street. It had rained while we were inside. The pavement reflected restaurant lights. Owen glanced toward the subway. So. This is either the part where we say that was strange and never see each other again, or the part where one of us does something potentially embarrassing. I dislike both categories. I noticed. I looked at him. 9 accidental minutes. That was all we had. Anything I thought I knew about him was absurdly incomplete. But the 40 minutes afterward had given me useful comparison data. I had wanted to return to the wrong table. What would the embarrassing thing be? I asked. His expression softened. Coffee. Tonight. No, I think we've tested the limits of Thursday. I smiled. Saturday. He looked surprised that I had answered so quickly. Saturday works. We exchanged numbers under the flower shop awning. When I got on the train, I had a message from him before the doors closed. Owen, for the record, I am never wearing green on a first date again. I wrote back. Daniel, that seems unfair to the sweater. Owen, it knows what it did. I looked at the message longer than necessary. Then Maya called. I answered. How did it go? Complicated. That's not an answer. I sat with the wrong man. There was silence. Then, what? By the time I finished explaining, she was laughing hard enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You can stop, I said. I absolutely cannot. It was 9 minutes. And you're seeing him Saturday. Yes. Maya made a sound of victory that I refused to acknowledge. Then she became serious. Daniel. What? Don't make the accident do all the work. I frowned. What does that mean? It means meeting someone by mistake is cute. Choosing them on purpose is the part that matters. I looked out the train window at my reflection. I know. But I did not. Not yet. Saturday, Owen chose a coffee shop in Cobble Hill that had no table by the window. I checked, he said when I arrived. For accidental dates. For green sweaters. He was wearing navy. I had expected to be nervous. Instead, I felt the odd relief of continuing a conversation that had been paused mid-sentence. We ordered coffee and walked because every table was full. It was cold but bright. Owen carried his cup in both hands. So what did your sister say? That you're a statistical anomaly. I like her. You haven't met her. I like the version that produced that sentence. Dangerous. He told me the friend who had set him up with Michael was named Chris, his business partner at the workshop. Chris has been married for 11 years, Owen said. He now believes marriage qualifies him to identify compatible adults from a distance. Maya has been single for 8 months. So less qualified. Much more confident. We walked through the neighborhood. The second date was different from the first accidental one because now we knew what we were doing. That made me more aware of him. The way he slowed whenever we approached a crosswalk instead of assuming I would follow. The way he looked at old buildings like he could see every repair hiding behind the paint. The way he listened without preparing his next story. I told him about Peter. Not the entire history. Enough. 4 years, Owen said. Yeah. How long ago? 18 months. He nodded. Do you miss him? The question was direct without being invasive. Sometimes, not in the way that means I want him back. What way? I miss knowing what someone is going to say before they say it. Owen smiled a little. That sounds both nice and terrible. Exactly. What did you learn? From the relationship. From the ending. I looked down at my coffee. That being peaceful isn't the same as being honest. Owen absorbed that. Useful. What about you? He took a few steps before answering. My last serious relationship ended 2 years ago. Why? I was somebody's almost. I looked at him. What does that mean? His ex moved back to New York. That sounds bad. It was less dramatic than you're imagining. They had been together 6 years. We dated for about 10 months. he kept saying the past was over. And it wasn't. Owen rubbed his thumb over the seam of the coffee cup. He didn't cheat on me, he just kept checking whether his ex needed anything, kept comparing places we went, kept talking about what he would do if the ex ever wanted to try again. That seems exhausting. It was. When did you leave? Later than I should have. Why? Owen gave me a sideways look. Because I kept telling myself being patient was mature. I understood that. What did you learn? That I don't want to be the reasonable option someone picks while waiting for the thing they actually want. The sentence stayed between us. I thought of the restaurant. Wrong table. Right table. Pleasant Evan. The easy temptation to turn a coincidence into a story because stories are simpler than decisions. So you want to be chosen, I said. I think everybody does. He said it without accusation. Still, I heard the weight beneath it. We reached a small park. There was an empty bench in the sun. We sat. Owen looked at me. Is this weird? What? That we met on dates with other people. Yes. Good. I laughed. He smiled. Then his expression became slightly more serious. I don't want the mistake to become the whole thing. Maya's sentence came back immediately. Choosing them on purpose is the part that matters. What would make it not the whole thing? Another date. This is another date. Then we're making progress. I looked at him. Do you always ask for evidence this quickly? Furniture conservator. That explains nothing. It explains that I distrust first impressions. I smiled. Thursday. His eyebrows lifted. You're asking. I'm experimenting. With what? Choosing. For 1 second, Owen said nothing. Then he smiled. Thursday. Our third date was dinner in Red Hook after he finished work. His workshop occupied the ground floor of an old brick building near the waterfront. When I arrived, the metal door was open. I could hear a radio somewhere inside. Owen was standing over a dining chair under a bright task lamp, wearing an old gray shirt and an apron dusted with pale wood. He looked up when I entered. You found it. You sent me the address. People still fail. The workshop smelled like wood, wax, and something faintly chemical. Chairs hung from wall racks. A long table near the back held clamps, brushes, cloth, and small labeled containers. I moved toward a half-restored cabinet. Owen pointed at me. Don't touch. I wasn't. You were thinking about it. I edit books, I understand museums. This is not a museum. It has more rules. He removed the apron. There was a streak of dust across his forearm. You hungry? Yes. We walked to a small Dominican restaurant 3 blocks away. Dinner was easy. Too easy, I thought at first. Then I caught myself. I had spent 18 months treating ease as suspicious because my last relationship had ended quietly. That was not fair to ease. There was a difference between comfort that came from avoiding truth and comfort that made truth easier. Owen seemed to create the second kind. He asked what I wanted without treating hesitation as an answer. He disagreed with me when he disagreed. He made fun of my habit of correcting menu punctuation. I made fun of the fact that he could identify wood species from 6 feet away. After dinner, we walked toward the waterfront. The wind off the river was cold. I put my hands in my pockets. Owen stopped near the railing. Manhattan glowed across the water. Can I ask you something? Depends. You always say that. It gives me options. He smiled. Then, can I kiss you? The question was simple enough that I felt my entire body stop trying to manage the moment. Yes. He stepped closer. His hand touched the side of my jaw. Warm despite the cold. The kiss was gentle. Not tentative exactly. Careful. When he pulled back, he stayed close enough that I could see the small scar across his knuckle again, where his hand rested on the railing. That okay? He asked. Yes. Good. I kissed him a second time. I had expected the first kiss to answer something. Instead, it created more questions. Not bad ones. How often would I see him? Would he text tomorrow? Would I? Was this already becoming something I could lose? I hated that last question. Owen looked at me. You went somewhere. What? In your head. Occupational hazard. That's my line. You restore chairs. I also observe. We started walking again. After 3 blocks, he reached for my hand. No announcement. No performance. I let him take it. The following weeks accumulated. That was the part I would have summarized if I wanted the story to move faster. But it was where we actually happened. Not at the wrong table. Not at the first kiss. In ordinary repetition. The first time I went to Owen's apartment, I understood why he had laughed when I asked whether living above a bakery was charming. At 6:30 on a Saturday morning, the entire building smelled like butter. I woke on his sofa because we had watched a movie the night before and neither of us had wanted to turn a late evening into a decision. Owen had offered me the bed. I had refused. He had called that performatively noble and taken the armchair for 20 minutes before I told him to stop being ridiculous. We ended up both sleeping badly in separate rooms anyway. At 6:30, I found him in the kitchen making coffee. You live inside a croissant, I said. I warned you. This is aggressive. You'll stop noticing by noon. I don't want to. He handed me a mug. His apartment was small and warm, with old floorboards and shelves he had built himself. There were no matching pieces of furniture, which I had expected from a man who restored things for a living. This chair is different from that one, I said. Yes. That table has 4 kinds of wood. Yes. Your profession has failed you. He looked offended. My profession taught me not to confuse matching with belonging together. I stared at him. He took a drink. That was good. You practiced it. I absolutely did not. Suspiciously thematic. He smiled. After breakfast, he took me to an outdoor antiques market under the Manhattan Bridge. This was, according to Owen, recreational. It looked like work. He examined drawer joints, chair backs, hinges, and damaged veneer with the concentration I normally reserved for an author using 3 footnotes to support a claim that required 1. At one stall, he stopped in front of a small oak side table with 1 uneven leg. The seller said it was early 20th century. Owen crouched. Late 40s. The seller frowned. Owen pointed at the underside. Machine-cut screws. The seller stared at him. I walked away. 5 minutes later, Owen caught up. You abandoned me. You were becoming professionally dangerous. He was wrong. I know. How? You made the face. What face? The one where you know somebody is wrong and are trying to decide whether correcting them is morally necessary. Owen laughed. You have the same face. I do not. You edit nonfiction. That does not mean I enjoy correcting people. He stopped walking. Daniel. Fine. We bought nothing. That became one of my favorite mornings. Not because anything happened. Because I watched him care about things without needing to own them. At lunch, we sat outside a small sandwich shop. Owen was telling me why a badly repaired chair could be harder to save than a broken one when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Chris. Business partner. Unfortunately. He answered. I listened to one side of a conversation about delivery times and a client who apparently believed Friday meant any hour before Sunday. When Owen hung up, he sighed. Problems. Normal problems. You didn't sound stressed. I am. You hide it well. He looked at me. Is that a compliment? I don't know. He folded the paper wrapper around his sandwich. I used to hide everything well. The answer caught me. Used to. Marcus hated conflict. Your ex. Yeah, if something bothered me, I would wait until I could explain it perfectly. By then, I'd usually convinced myself it wasn't worth mentioning. I looked down at my coffee. That sounds familiar. I know. You don't know me that well. I know enough. He said it gently. Then, I'm trying not to do that anymore. What does trying look like? He considered the question. Saying I'm irritated before I've built a court case. That sounds terrifying. It is. Any other symptoms? Asking questions I might not like the answer to. I looked at him. He smiled. Not today. Good. Maybe tomorrow. It was a joke. Mostly. But it stayed with me because Owen was not asking me to become fearless about conflict. He was showing me that honesty could happen before anyone was cornered. I had always thought difficult conversations arrived because something had gone wrong. With him, I started to understand they could also be maintenance. That afternoon, when we reached the subway entrance, Owen said, I want to see you Tuesday. It was not phrased as a question. I like that. I can do Tuesday. 7:30, I have a meeting until 6. See. What? Information. I laughed. You're very proud of us. Prematurely. I kissed him at the top of the subway stairs. People moved around us. Nobody cared. For the first time since Peter, being seen with someone did not feel like a statement I had to manage. It simply felt true. Tuesday lunches, when my office schedule allowed, became Thursday dinners. A Sunday morning at the farmer's market ended with Owen spending $12 on apples because the vendor described them as structurally interesting. A rainy evening in my apartment ended with him repairing a loose dining chair joint while I edited a chapter about 19th century city planning. You know, I replaced this table after Peter moved out, I said. Owen looked up from the chair. Why? The old one was ours. Was it good? What? The table. Yes. Then that was wasteful. I threw a pencil at him. He caught it. Emotionally wasteful furniture is still furniture. You are deeply romantic. I'm repairing your chair for free. Fair. He smiled. Then he became quieter. Does Peter know you're dating? I looked up. No. Do you talk? Birthday texts, occasionally something about mutual friends. Owen nodded. I knew why he was asking. Not jealousy. Context. The last relationship he had described had contained a ghost that was technically outside the room and still occupied half of it. I don't want him back, I said. I didn't ask. I know. Owen went back to the chair. I'm telling you anyway. He looked at me then. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, I heard you. I realized he was not going to reward the statement like I had passed a test. That was unexpectedly comforting. A week later, I met Chris. He was not what I expected from the man who had engineered Owen's original blind date. I had imagined someone aggressively social. Instead, Chris was 40, soft-spoken, married to a pediatric nurse named Ben, and deeply amused by the fact that his matchmaking failure had produced a relationship anyway. We met at a small noodle place near the workshop. Chris shook my hand and said, "So you're the administrative error." I prefer unintended outcome. Owen sat down beside me. Do not encourage him. Chris looked at Owen. You wore the green sweater. Yes. I told you navy. You did not. I absolutely did. Owen turned to me. This is revisionist history. You're asking an editor to arbitrate without documentation. Chris pointed at me. I like him. Dinner was easy until Chris asked how long we had been together. Owen and I answered at the same time. 6 weeks, he said. We're dating, I said. The difference was tiny. I felt it immediately. Chris did too, judging by the speed with which he became interested in his noodles. Owen did not correct me. He did not ask about it afterward. That should have relieved me. Instead, it followed me home. At my apartment, I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth and thought about 2 phrases. 6 weeks. We're dating. One was a measure of time. The other was a category with no promise inside it. I had chosen the safer answer without even realizing I was doing it. The next morning, Owen texted me a photograph of an old chair frame from the workshop. Owen before. An hour later. Owen after phase 1. I looked at the 2 images. The second barely seemed different until I noticed that one unstable joint had been carefully opened and cleaned instead of simply glued shut. Daniel, that looks worse. Owen, correct. Daniel, excellent business model. Owen, sometimes you have to take apart the bad repair before you can make the right one. I stared at the sentence. Then typed. Daniel, is that chair advice or an attack? His reply. Owen, chair advice. Then. Owen, mostly. I laughed. But I saved the photographs. The first real problem arrived in week 5. Maya was moving apartments. This should not have been my problem. It became my problem because Maya called on Wednesday afternoon and said the movers had changed the arrival window to Friday. Her new landlord would not let them reserve the service elevator after 4, and her friend who had promised to help had the flu. I'll come, I said. You have worked. I can move things after. You have a date. I looked at my calendar. Owen. Friday at 7. Dinner at my place. He had offered to cook. I can move it. Maya was silent. What? Nothing. You called me for help. I called to complain. You said Lena has the flu. I can hire another hour of moving help. That costs money. So does your time. Not to you. There was another silence. Daniel. What? You do this. Do what? Decide everybody needs you before they get the chance to solve anything themselves. I leaned back in my office chair. That's unfair. Is it? I'm your brother. Yes, which is why I'm telling you I can survive a move without sacrificing your Friday night. I'm not sacrificing anything. Maya sighed. That sentence is the problem. I hated when she was right. I hated it more because Owen had already said something similar in another form. I still texted him. Daniel, Maya's move got messed up Friday. Can we push dinner to Saturday? He answered 10 minutes later. Owen, sure, everything okay? Daniel, yes, movers are complicated. Owen, want help? My first response was immediate. No. Not because I did not want him there. Because inviting him into a family problem felt like allowing two parts of my life to touch before I had planned the seam. I did not send it. Instead, Daniel, you don't have to do that. Owen, I know. I stared at the words. I typed. Daniel, if you actually want to, an extra pair of hands would help. Owen, send me the address. Friday afternoon, Owen arrived at Maya's old apartment carrying coffee and wearing work gloves. Maya opened the door. She looked at him. Then at me. Then back at him. You're the wrong date. Owen smiled. I've heard a lot about you too. Maya hugged him before I could intervene. Moving day lasted 5 hours. Owen carried boxes without trying to impress anyone. He repaired the loose leg on Maya's desk because he noticed it wobbling. He and Maya argued about whether a lamp from college should survive another apartment. I stayed mostly quiet during that discussion because they were both wrong. At 7:30, we ate pizza on the floor of her new living room. Maya looked around. Okay, this was worth dating the wrong person. I closed my eyes. Owen laughed. Later, in the hallway outside her apartment, I said, I'm sorry. For what? My sister. She's great. She has no boundaries. She has some, they're just located elsewhere. I smiled. Owen leaned against the wall. You know you could have just gone on our dates. I know. She really would have been okay. I know. Do you? I looked at him. He was not angry. That somehow made the question harder. I'm working on it. On what? Not treating being useful like a moral obligation. Owen nodded. I don't mind helping. I know. But I also don't want every plan with you to be the first thing moved when someone else needs something. The sentence hit exactly where it was meant to. That's fair. His expression softened slightly. I'm not asking to be more important than your family. I know. I'm asking not to be imaginary until nobody else needs you. I looked down the hallway. There were moments when Peter used to tell me he did not know what I wanted. I had always heard criticism in it. Maybe because I had not known either. Owen. Yeah. I wanted dinner with you tonight. He waited. I wanted that before Maya called. Okay. And I still chose to help. Okay. I'm not sure what lesson I'm supposed to take from that. He smiled a little. Maybe that wanting me and helping your sister can both be true. That sounds suspiciously healthy. I have moments. I laughed. Then he held out his hand. Saturday. Saturday. We did have dinner Saturday. He cooked at my apartment. Not well. This mattered because I had started thinking he might be competent at everything. He burned garlic. I told him. He blamed my stove. I told him my stove had not changed since Thursday. He claimed environmental sabotage. Afterward, while we were washing dishes, he kissed me with soap on one hand and got foam on my sleeve. This is why people use towels, I said. This is why people own washing machines. You are not coming near my furniture with that philosophy. He laughed. I loved the sound. The realization arrived before I was ready for the word around it. Not love. Not yet. But the edge of something that could become it. That frightened me more than I expected. For 2 weeks, I responded by becoming extremely reasonable. I did not withdraw. That would have been obvious. I simply stopped advancing. We saw each other. We kissed. We slept beside each other once after a late movie, fully clothed except for our shoes because neither of us wanted to turn an accidental overnight into a conversation we had not had. I liked waking with his hand loosely resting near mine. I said nothing about it. Owen noticed. Of course he did. The conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon at his workshop. He was finishing the surface of a walnut side table. I was sitting on a stool reading proofs. At 4, he put down the cloth in his hand. What are we doing? I looked up. You're repairing a table. Daniel. I set the pages down. There it was. The question I had known would come eventually and still managed to resent for arriving. What do you mean? I mean we've been seeing each other for almost 2 months. I know. We spend 3 nights a week together when schedules cooperate. You have met Chris. I have carried your sister's bed frame up 4 flights of stairs. You keep oat milk in your refrigerator because I use it. That was on sale. He stared at me. Bad time for jokes. Very. Owen leaned against the work table. I'm not asking you to move in. I know. I'm asking whether you think we're building something or whether we're just continuing because we accidentally started. The sentence made me defensive immediately. That's not fair. His face tightened. Okay. No, I mean. I stood. We didn't just continue by accident. Then tell me that. I'm here. That isn't the same. I hated that he was right. Owen looked at the side table instead of me. My last relationship lasted 10 months because I kept accepting evidence instead of answers. I'm not him. I know. Then don't make me pay for what he did. His eyes returned to mine. I'm telling you what I need. The room went quiet. A radio played faintly somewhere in the back. I could smell wax and wood dust. What do you need? I asked. To know whether you're choosing this. I opened my mouth. Nothing came. Not because I did not know, Because saying it would make the relationship specific. Specific things could fail. Specific things could disappoint people. Specific things could not hide inside routine. Owen watched the silence happen. His expression changed. Not anger. Recognition. That hurt more. I think I have my answer, he said. No. Daniel. No, you have my hesitation. What's the difference if I'm the one waiting? I looked away. He took a slow breath. I'm not ending this. I looked back. I'm asking you to figure out what you're actually willing to say before I keep building around it. How much time? He shook his head. That's not a deadline question. I know. Do you? I almost smiled. He did not. So I did not. I'll call you. When you know what you want, call me. I left the workshop alone. For the first time since we met, the mistake felt useful again. Because I could blame it. We had met strangely. Things had moved quickly. Maybe I needed more time. Maybe the whole relationship was built on the charm of a story we could tell other people. Maybe. On the subway home, my phone buzzed. Peter. His name appeared on the screen so unexpectedly that for 1 second I thought the universe had become embarrassingly literal. Peter, hey, random question. Do you still have that box of my grandfather's postcards? I think it ended up with your books when I moved. I stared at the message. Then laughed. Quietly enough that the woman across from me looked concerned. Of course. The ghost from my old relationship had arrived to ask about a box. I replied, I'll check tonight. At home, I found it in the top shelf of my hall closet. A small gray archival box. Peter had labeled it years ago in black marker. I sat on the floor with it in my lap. I did not open it. I thought about the last year we had lived together. How many times Peter had asked, what do you want to do? And I had answered, I don't care. Dinner. Weekends. Vacations. Paint colors. Whether we should renew the lease. I had believed flexibility was kindness. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was refusal disguised as accommodation. If I never chose, nobody could accuse me of choosing wrong. Peter had eventually chosen for both of us. Seattle. The end. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. Hey. Found the postcards. That was fast. I'm disturbingly organized. I remember. There was no ache in hearing his voice. Only familiarity. That felt like useful information. I can mail them Monday. Thanks. We talked for another minute about a mutual friend's new baby. Then Peter said, you sound good. I looked around my apartment. At the chair Owen had repaired. At the oat milk in the refrigerator, I could see through the kitchen doorway. At the jacket he had left on the hook 2 nights earlier. I am dating. I laughed once. That obvious. You bought oat milk. I stared toward the kitchen. How do you know about that? You hated it. I still do. Peter laughed. Then his voice softened. I hope it's good. I thought of Owen standing in the workshop asking whether I was choosing this. It is. There it was. The answer. Not because Peter had given it to me. Because saying it out loud to someone from my old life made the difference impossible to avoid. I wanted Owen. Not as a pleasant accident. Not as a story. Not because our dates were easy. I wanted the complicated part too. The part where I had to say it before I knew whether saying it guaranteed anything. After we hung up, I did not call Owen immediately. That surprised me. Instead, I took a shower, made dinner, sat at the table, and wrote down what I wanted. This was embarrassing. I did it anyway. I wanted to date Owen exclusively. I wanted him to keep leaving oat milk in my refrigerator. I wanted to know what his workshop looked like in winter. I wanted to meet his mother, whom he called every Wednesday. I wanted him to meet mine. I wanted to stop treating every plan as temporary until it survived enough tests. I wanted room to be unsure about the future without using uncertainty as an excuse to be silent about the present. The list looked absurdly clear. I called Maya. She answered, "Did you break it?" What? The wrong date relationship. No. Yet. Helpful. I told her what happened at the workshop. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you want advice or do you want me to tell you you're annoying?" Advice. Disappointing. Maya. Tell him what you just told me. That I'm annoying. The other part. I didn't tell you the list. What list? I closed my eyes. She started laughing. You made a list. Goodbye. No, wait, Daniels. I stayed. Her voice softened. You keep acting like certainty is the price of admission. It isn't. What is? Honesty. That was annoyingly concise. The next morning I texted Owen. Daniel, are you at the workshop today? He replied 20 minutes later. Owen, until 4. Daniel, can I come by? A longer pause. Owen, yes. I arrived at 3:20. The metal door was open. Owen was standing the edge of a small desk. He looked up. Hi. Hi. No smile. Not yet. I walked to the work table but stopped on the other side. I made a list. His eyebrows lifted despite himself. Of course you did. I knew you'd react badly. I'm reacting perfectly. I took a folded sheet of paper from my coat pocket. Owen stared. You brought it. I need structure. That part I know. I unfolded the page. He leaned both hands on the table. Daniel, you don't have to present evidence. I know. Then what is that? Insurance. Against forgetting. Against softening. Against becoming reasonable again. I looked at the paper once. Then put it face down. I want to be your boyfriend. Owen went very still. I continued. I want us to be exclusive. I want to keep doing what we're doing, except I want to stop acting like not naming it protects anything. His expression changed. Okay. I'm not done. I assumed. I don't know where we are in a year. Neither do I. I don't know if I'll become irritating about your workshop schedule or if you'll eventually ban me from correcting menus in public. Likely. I don't know if choosing this means it works. Owen watched me. But I know I'm choosing it. There. The sentence did not create a guarantee. Nothing happened to the ceiling. No orchestra. No certainty arrived. Owen simply looked at me for several seconds. Then he said, "That's what I needed." I exhaled. Good. And for the record, I wasn't asking for a guarantee. I know that now. You thought I wanted one. I think I wanted you to want one because then I could explain why I couldn't give it. Owen's mouth tightened into the beginning of a smile. That is impressively complicated. I've had practice. He came around the work table. Stopped in front of me. Can I see the list? No. Why? There are vulnerable statements on it. You just asked to be my boyfriend. That was verbal, this is documented. He laughed. The sound released something in my chest. I folded the paper and put it back in my pockets. Owen touched my hand. So, you're my boyfriend. That appears to be the agreement. Terrible wording. I'm emotional. Clearly. I smiled. He kissed me. The kiss was warm and familiar now. Different from the first one beside the river. That one had opened a door. This one felt like walking through it on purpose. When we separated, Owen looked at me. Friday. My mother's birthday dinner. He nodded immediately. Saturday. I almost said yes. Then stopped. My mother's birthday dinner is not a state secret. Owen waited. Do you want to come? His eyebrows rose. Are you sure? No. He smiled. Good answer. I'm serious. So am I. I held his gaze. Yes, I want you there. Then I want to come. Saturday became Sunday. Sunday became 3 months. There was no montage in real life. There were annoying details. Owen left cabinet doors open. I corrected his punctuation in text messages once and learned not to do it again. He sometimes disappeared into workshop projects and forgot lunch. I sometimes agreed to things without checking whether I had time, then resented the schedule I had created myself. We got better at telling each other earlier. Not perfectly. Better. He met my mother at her birthday dinner. She liked him immediately because he complimented her dining table before complimenting the food. You have priorities, she told him. I work with furniture. I know. I looked at her. How? Maya. Of course. I met Owen's mother 2 weeks later at a small Colombian restaurant in Queens. She brought a photograph of Owen at 14 with bleached hair. He threatened to leave. I asked for a copy. By autumn, Owen had a toothbrush at my apartment. Not because of a discussion. Because one Saturday morning he complained that mine was aggressively medium and went downstairs to buy his own. I found it beside mine that evening. 2 toothbrushes. That should not have felt significant. It did. The strangest moment came in November. Marlowe's closed. Not permanently. Renovation. A handwritten sign appeared in the window saying they would reopen in January. I saw it while walking home and sent Owen a photograph. Daniel, they're fixing the scene of the crime. He replied, Owen, we should demand preservation status. A minute later, Owen, dinner tonight. I wrote, Daniel, yes. Then, Daniel, on purpose. His reply came immediately. Owen, finally. When Marlowe's reopened, we went back. Not for an anniversary. We had not agreed what counted as ours. The mistaken date. The first intentional coffee. The first kiss. The workshop conversation. Trying to make one moment carry the whole relationship felt unfair. We simply went on a Thursday because Owen had finished early and I wanted wine. The room looked almost the same. New paint. Different lights. Same front window. The table was open. Owen stopped beside it. No. I laughed. Why? Bad history. I thought you liked old things. Not all restoration is ethical. We sat anyway. He wore black. I wore gray. We had learned. Halfway through dinner, a man entered alone wearing a green sweater. Owen looked at me. I looked at him. Absolutely not, he said. I laughed so hard the server looked over. Later, while we waited for the check, Owen reached across the table and turned my hand palm up. His thumb moved once over my knuckles. Do you ever think about Michael? I stared at him. Your actual dates? No. Poor Michael. He was nice. So was Evan. I know. Do you think they found people? I hope so. Owen nodded. Then smiled. We were terrible blind dates. We were perfectly good blind dates. For other people. That was the problem. The server brought the check. I looked at Owen. The first night we met, I had spent 9 minutes thinking he was someone else. After that, I spent nearly 2 months trying to avoid saying exactly who I wanted him to be. Boyfriend. Chosen person. Someone specific. It would have been easy to make our story about luck. Wrong table. Wrong sweater. A room loud enough for one name to sound like another. Those things mattered. Without them, maybe we never would have met. But luck had only introduced us. Everything important after that had been less charming. Showing up. Asking. Answering. Saying no when no was honest. Saying yes before certainty arrived. Choosing the same person after the story stopped being accidental. Owen squeezed my hand. What are you thinking? I looked at him. Nothing. He narrowed his eyes. That's a lie. Old habit. Try again. I smiled. I'm glad I sat at the wrong table. His expression softened. Me too. Then he looked toward the entrance. But if a man named Michael walks in, we're leaving. I laughed. Agreed. The first time I met Owen, I thought the mistake was sitting down. It took me a while to understand the mistake would have been standing back up.